The stores are everywhere. You have seen them your whole life. The blue and yellow sign, the smell of plastic casing and carpet, the wall of new releases arranged like a promise. It is 2004, and Blockbuster operates more than 9,000 locations across the United States alone. The stock is climbing. The company employs 60,000 people. Its CEO speaks at industry conferences with the measured confidence of a man whose position is not in question. The future, he suggests, looks very much like the present, only larger. Now cut to 2010. The stores are closing, not one or two, all of them eventually. The CEO is gone. The debt has reached $900 million. In September of that year, Blockbuster files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and the largest video rental chain in the history of the world begins the process of ceasing to exist. The silence that follows is not dramatic. It is simply the sound of something that seemed permanent turning out not to be. The story begins not with technology, but with a problem every American family recognized. It was 1985. You wanted to watch a movie on a Friday night, and your options were whatever happened to be on television or a trip to a small, often disorganized local video store where the clerk may or may not have heard of what you were looking for. David Cook, a software entrepreneur from Texas, saw something different. If you applied logistics, real inventory management, systematic stocking, consistent presentation, you could build something scalable out of what was then a cottage industry. He opened the first Blockbuster in Dallas that October. The concept was immediately legible to consumers. Wide aisles, organized shelves, a massive selection far beyond what any mom-and-pop operation could offer. No membership required, no cryptic catalog. You walked in, you found your movie, you paid a few dollars, you went home. Cook's background in data processing meant Blockbuster tracked inventory with a precision unusual for retail at the time. Franchises expanded rapidly across the country, and by the early 1990s, the chain had become something close to an institution. Viacom acquired the company in 1994 for roughly $8.4 billion, a valuation that reflected not just current earnings, but the assumption of indefinite growth. At its peak, Blockbuster was opening a new store roughly every 17 hours. It had penetrated suburban America so thoroughly that its blue and yellow signs became a kind of shorthand for Friday nights, for shared ritual, for the reliable pleasure of choosing something off a shelf. The late fee, that particular detail would prove relevant later, generated an estimated $800 million a year in additional revenue. The business model was not merely functional, it was, by its own metrics, remarkably effective. Employees described the culture of those years with a particular texture, competitive but assured, focused on expansion, accustomed to success. The company's leaders understood their market well. They simply did not understand how quickly the market could be replaced. In the year 2000, two entrepreneurs named Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph traveled to Dallas. They had been running a small mail-order DVD rental service for about 2 years. The company, Netflix, was not yet profitable. Its subscriber base was modest. It had a concept, rental by mail, no late fees, a subscription model that had found an audience but had not yet proved it could scale into something transformative. They offered to sell the company to Blockbuster for $50 million. Meeting did not go well. By several accounts, Blockbuster's leadership found the proposition faintly amusing. $50 million for a niche internet business losing money, a company that sent DVDs through the post to a small slice of customers who preferred that to driving to a store. The offer was declined. The reasoning, from inside Blockbuster's perspective, was not irrational. Netflix at the time served perhaps 300,000 subscribers. Blockbuster served tens of millions. The comparison, rendered in numbers on a spreadsheet in a Dallas conference room in 2000, did not suggest existential threat. It suggested a curiosity. What made this decision comprehensible and ultimately fatal was not stupidity, but the particular trap that successful organizations set for themselves. Blockbuster's leadership was not ignoring data. They were reading the data they had, through the lens of the assumptions they had accumulated. Late fees were enormously profitable. Physical retail was where customers were. Their own internal research likely showed that the majority of their customers found in-store selection satisfactory. Every metric that Blockbuster tracked said the business was healthy. The error was not in the analysis of the present. It was in the failure to imagine a different future, specifically the failure to ask, what happens when the friction of driving to a store begins to feel like an imposition rather than a norm? What happens when the internet is no longer a novelty but infrastructure? Blockbuster's business model was built on convenience relative to what came before it. It never adequately reckoned with the possibility that a new baseline would render it inconvenient by comparison. There were people inside the company who understood the threat. John Antioco, who became CEO in 1997, would later attempt a genuine strategic pivot. But in 2000, the dominant institutional instinct was not to pivot, it was to protect. The chain reaction that followed was not a single event. It was a gradual accumulation of pressure that Blockbuster consistently addressed too little, too late, and sometimes in ways that made the underlying problem worse. Between 2000 and 2004, Netflix grew from roughly 300,000 subscribers to 3 million. The growth rate was visible in the trade press. Blockbuster's internal response was cautious. The company experimented with online services and discussed strategic alternatives, but the late fee revenue continued to anchor decision-making. Eliminating late fees, which Antioco eventually proposed in 2004, was the right strategic instinct. It removed the most common source of customer resentment and positioned Blockbuster to compete directly with Netflix on terms customers actually cared about. But the program was implemented inconsistently and then largely reversed after pressure from franchisees and a board that had grown wary of the costs involved. The board pressure came in part from Carl Icahn, the activist investor who had acquired a significant stake in the company. Icahn opposed the online strategy and the elimination of late fees as expensive distractions. In 2005, he successfully pushed for changes that curtailed the very initiatives most likely to have extended Blockbuster's viability. The company's 2005 annual report would later show losses deepening partly as a result of the investment in online competition. But the deeper truth is that what appeared to be a financial liability was actually the cost of a necessary transformation that was never fully funded or followed through. By 2006, Netflix had grown to 6 million subscribers and was accelerating. Blockbuster's own online service, Blockbuster Total Access, was gaining traction. It allowed customers to return online rentals to physical stores, a genuine differentiator. But the financial pressure on the parent company made sustained investment increasingly difficult. Antioco was pushed out in 2007. His replacement, James Keyes, arrived from the convenience store industry and famously stated that he did not believe Netflix posed a significant competitive threat. The timing was not coincidental. The iPhone launched in 2007. Streaming video, still in its early stages, was about to become viable at scale. While Blockbuster was cycling through leadership and strategy debates, the technological substrate of the entertainment industry was shifting in ways that would soon make the physical rental format, any physical rental format, structurally obsolete. Revenue, which had peaked at around $6 billion in the mid-2000s, began falling in earnest. Between 2006 and 2010, the company lost more than $1 billion. Thousands of employees were laid off. Stores closed across the country, not in a single announced wave, but in the slow, demoralizing rhythm of a business in contraction. Morale among remaining employees reflected what the numbers were showing. This was not a company managing a transition. This was a company managing a decline. The window for genuine reinvention had existed, arguably, from roughly 2004 to 2007. 3 years of real commitment to a hybrid online physical model, funded adequately and protected from short-term earnings pressure, might have yielded something durable. But 3 years is a long time to sustain institutional will against investor impatience, franchise resistance, and the psychological comfort of legacy revenue that is still, for the moment, arriving. By September 2010, the numbers were irreversible. Blockbuster's debt stood at approximately $900 million. On September 23, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a federal court in New York. The filing was not a surprise to analysts. The surprise for many was that it had taken this long. The last ordinary Thursday before the announcement looked, in thousands of stores across the country, exactly like the Thursdays before it. Clerks restocking shelves, customers browsing new releases, registers processing transactions. The company had not yet told the people who worked in those stores what was coming. The knowledge of institutional failure rarely distributes evenly or quickly. In the months that followed, the human texture of the collapse became visible. 60,000 employees moved through the uncertainty of a bankrupt employer. Landlords across the country began conversations about vacated retail space. Investors absorbed losses on a company that had once been a Wall Street darling. Dish Network acquired Blockbuster's assets in 2011 for roughly $320 million, a fraction of its peak valuation, and continued operating a small number of stores under the brand name before licensing and contracting that number further. Today, a single company-operated Blockbuster store remains in Bend, Oregon. It functions as both a video rental shop and, by its own self-aware acknowledgement, a kind of living museum. People visit it the way they might visit a particular kind of monument, not to rent movies exactly, but to stand inside something that used to exist everywhere and now exists nowhere else. The standard lesson drawn from Blockbuster's collapse is that the company failed to innovate, or that it ignored disruption, or that its leaders were simply not visionary enough. These explanations are not wrong exactly, but they are insufficient. They frame the failure as a matter of imagination, as if the right CEO would have seen what was coming and acted accordingly. This lets the rest of us off too easily. The more precise lesson is this: Blockbuster was defeated not by what it failed to imagine, but by what it could not afford, institutionally, not financially, to take seriously. The late fee revenue was real. The franchise relationships were real. The board pressure was real. The Netflix threat in 2000 or even 2004 was speculative. In a large organization, speculative threats compete for resources against known revenue, and known revenue tends to win. This is not a failure of vision. It is a structural feature of success itself. Every large organization that has achieved profitability through a particular model develops a set of institutional commitments to suppliers, to investors, to employees, to processes that make changing the model costly in ways that go far beyond strategy. What Blockbuster experienced is sometimes called the innovator's dilemma. The practices that make you dominant in one era make you inflexible in the next. The companies most at risk are not the struggling ones. They are the ones that are working. The trap still exists. It exists in any organization where the metrics most carefully tracked are those that reflect the current model rather than the forces gathering against it. It exists wherever short-term earnings pressure crowds out investment in futures that are not yet legible to spreadsheets. It exists wherever the people raising uncomfortable questions about the business model are heard politely and then effectively managed out of the decision-making process. The specific form of Blockbuster's failure, a digital competitor arriving through a channel the incumbent could not or would not take seriously, has recurred across industries since. It will recur again. The mechanism is not new, only the names change. The Blockbuster brand still exists technically. It is a trademark, a piece of intellectual property that has changed hands and continues to generate some licensing revenue. The physical stores, the rental shelves, the late fee receipts, those are gone. The experience they provided, the particular pleasure of browsing a wall of film cases on a Friday night with no particular destination in mind, is over. What remains, besides the one store in Oregon, is a data point in the history of how industries end. Not with a single blow, but with a series of reasonable-seeming decisions, each one defensible in its moment, adding up to something that could not be undone. The final irony is not that Blockbuster missed the future. It is that the future, in the year 2000, came to them directly and offered itself for $50 million. They looked at it carefully, they did the math, and they said no.